From middle school to the first year of high school, I went to a school in Miami that seemed like a private country club. The whole cheerleader, football player, clique-y thing there was terrifying. Those people were so scary. They're the scariest kinds of people because they are idolized by their peers. It's a dream for every football player to play in the Premier League. The atmosphere, the stadiums are always full. There were a couple of years when I wanted to be a football player, but I really always wanted to be a singer. I look at athletes in all sports and try to picture what kind of football player they'd be, what position they'd play and so on. Once you're a football player, you're a football player for life. You always think of yourself in terms of that. We all do. It's hard to get rid of when you can't play anymore. If we want the best pitcher, let's get Bobby Feller. If want the best football player, let's get Jimmy Brown. The best basketball player, let's get Bill Russell. If we want the guy who can do the best job for the United States, let's get Donald Trump. I was a very good baseball and football player, but my father always told me I was much more interested in how I looked playing baseball or football than in actually playing. There's great truth in that. The people that I see on the street, they treat me more as a human being and not just an icon or a football player. When I was young, all the books were about a Mary Jane and the football player and the prom and ending up with the quiet guy and making your mom happy. The only thing I ever wanted to be was a professional football player. I have always been an outstanding football player. I have always had uncanny abilities, great arm strength, an immense ability to play the game from a quarterback standpoint. The problem was that I wasn't given the liberty to do certain things when I was young. If you identify yourself as a great football player, anytime anyone challenges that, you're going to have some kind of problem. I was born in Dortmund and grew up here, so you become automatically a black and yellow. I played here for many years in the youth ranks, but at first I did not have the chance to become a professional football player at BVB and to realize my dream. My mother said I would have more chances to become a tennis player than a football player. I started out as a football player. I liked to inflict pain. In basketball, it was the same thing. How can I be a great football player when you're not happy with yourself? My father was raised with brothers. He was a football player and a boxer. He was a chief petty officer in the Navy. He was a man of his times. Well, I don't think I've necessarily ever been a passionate football player or a passionate person. Maradona, I think, is not a football player but he's something different. He was unbelievable. Some of the money going to the rookies can now be spent on people who have proved their worth. After all, the average playing life of a pro football player is about 8 years and it is only fitting that the veterans get something for their efforts. Every football player knows when his time is up. As a professional football player, I have known perfectly well from the day I started playing that every day I have to fight for my place. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a football player, so I achieved my dream. I grew up watching my older brother very closely who was a football player and a star in my hometown of Fremont, Ohio. My love of the game started early because of watching him. My neighborhood played a ton of football, pick-up games outside in the backyards of the apartments where I grew up. The way I look at it is that somebody in the world, no matter what your field is, teacher, violinist, football player, has to be the best. Why not me? The key thing with any football player is, what can he do when he gets on the field? I might not be a great athlete, but I think I'm a real good football player. Every time a football player goes to ply his trade, he's got to play from the ground up, from the soles of his feet right up to his head. Every inch of him has to play. I was a good football player, and I had a chance to play with some great players. Ronaldo is the best of the best, I mean not only as a football player but also as a human being. You can see how he developed and how devoted he is to really staying on top every year to excel. I think that is something unbelievable, and I said it before and will say it again, he is an athlete, and an athlete is a positive thing. I'll tell you what, I've never seen any football player more uncomfortable in a situation of having to make a one-on-one move on somebody than Patrick Mahomes in space. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I never really had a job. I was a football player, then a football coach, then a football broadcaster. It's been my life. Pro football has been my life since 1967. I've enjoyed every part of it. Never once did it ever feel like work. I think if I were a college professor, no one would say I was uncomfortable about being shy because that might be expected. But I think because of people's stereotypes, they think of a football player as someone who is very outgoing and I'm not. I may be a successful football player, but I feel like such a failure. Women will not talk about football unless one of them is in love with a football player, and then suddenly you discover that they know everything that is to be known about it. I'm not a football player 24 hours a day. If I stayed a football player, my career would have been over 20 years ago. As it is, my knees are shot. I found I got the same good feeling in acting that I had in sports, but I found I could have a more profound impact on people. I think the thing about that was I was always willing to work. I was not the fastest or biggest player, but I was determined to be the best football player I could be on the football field, and I think I was able to accomplish that through hard work. I feel fortunate that there was a place like the CFL where I could hone my skill and become a consistent football player and have a nice career. My dream was to be a football player. I just love sports, basketball, baseball, football. As a kid I did it all, but in my heart, I'm a football player. There's nothing like it. It's what I live for. Ever since I could walk, I've been drawn to it. I stepped away to find out more about myself, which I was having difficulty doing as a football player. I got a chance to travel the world. I studied Eastern philosophy, and I've grown as a person so much. Bavaro's probably as tough of a, physically and mentally as tough a football player as I've ever coached. So, I would put him in the rare category there. Jim Thorpe is someone I've always loved. He was an Olympic athlete, you know, and a football player from back in the day. I'd love to play him. And then there's a guy called Iceman who was a top hit man for the Mob. I would love to play him. Actually, it's sort of in the works, so I hope it goes through. As a former football player who has carried a football more than 4,000 times, trust me, I did not go into ballroom dancing with my body being 100%, with no aches or pains or ailments coming with me. When you're dancing, you're doing stuff that your body's not used to, and so you start to aggravate those old injuries. Fear can be conquered. I became a better person and a better football player when I learned that lesson. At the end of the day, who you are as a man is more important than who you are as a football player. I wanted to be a football player. Football is a sport that I love, but the more I started playing basketball, the more I started dreaming of playing in the NBA. I was not a very good football player when I started out. We're dealing with men here. What we're trying to do is help them become the best players they can be, and we're all collectively trying to win games. So what I always tell people is that the way you earn these players' respect is, do you make them a better football player? Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.